There's so many good quotes that I've picked up over the last, always learning and growing. But somebody mentions, they're like, I love reading a book, right? Because a book is like somebody's 20 years of experience all packaged up, and for $15 you can just hack this person's life, learn everything they have about this topic or this, and learn from that. And so I've always enjoyed learning and reading books, mostly self-improvement books, business books, finance books, running businesses, being a leader, those types of things.
If you summarize it, what are you getting out of it? What's the couple things that someone would say, oh, you're spending a lot of money, but what are you getting out of it? What's the
great question.
upside?
Well, because I think that there's two sides to the coaching world, right? There's people that are doing a great job, that have really good information, really good content, great things to share, and real experience to divulge to other people. And then you've got a bunch of wannabes that are out there just trying to make a buck.
At this point, because it's not recording. All right, and welcome. This is the Bold Strong Podcast. I'm your host, Craig Nadeau, and today we have with us my friend Stephen Lohr. We have a number of different things we're going to talk about. It's going to be a great show. If you enjoy it, please like it, subscribe, of course, and also thanks to our sponsor partner staffing. Let's just jump right into it with Stephen. All right, Stephen, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the show. This is the first time you've actually been on the show, although you've been in the room. You've recorded videos in here.
You bet. And, it's great space.
It's better to be on that side of the table. Maybe. Yeah. Cool.
Awesome.
So, what's going on in the world of Stephen these days? What's new and exciting?
Yeah, lots of fun things going on. I've taken a bit of a leap into the world of self-improvement and coaching and mentoring.
And God knows you needed it.
Right? Sure did.
That's what everyone's been saying, and so we're all glad. It was an interventional moment, and we're glad you're finally doing something about it.
Excellent. I know you've been quietly nudging me along with the pitchfork for a while, but that's great. Well done.
Cool. So you're, and I guess we'll talk about it a bit, but you've been doing the work you've been doing, which is primarily in the world of finance, let's call it, for a long time, as long as I've known you, actually. Yeah. I don't think you've done anything else in that time frame.
Yeah, since 2008 I've been in
the industry. You did that one time when you were on OnlyFans for a little while. It didn't work out so well.
Yeah, the feet thing.
Yeah, not good. Yeah. And then you jumped back into finance, which is great. And then now I don't know if it's really a difference as more of a kind of an expansion of what you were doing and not accepting kind of where you were sitting really is.
Yeah, I think for a long time I just felt like I didn't have any motivation to take on risk and to grow and expand both personally and professionally. And so I think, because my personal life was unstable, I would say, for quite a while, I felt like I couldn't take on additional risk in those areas. Yeah. And now I finally felt like I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm essentially at the same level I was 5 years ago. In a number of different areas, it's time to step up and move along.
Isn't it weird that, and I think I experience a bit of the same thing where I think when there's instability in life, and then it means that it's tougher to take the risk. And it might not even be like an obvious risk where you're putting yourself financially on the line, but you're just like doing stuff that you weren't doing otherwise, or that you should be doing and that you're not doing. So that's an interesting component of life. Yeah,
I think it's risk reward, and so I think that oftentimes when things feel unstable, the natural thing for us humans is to resort back to that safety area.
Insulate, just to bring it in.
Yeah. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, because I know that there's some people that can get completely overwhelmed by life and things, and if you take on too much, you can get pretty destroyed and pretty beaten up.
Yeah.
So I think it's fair to for us to take a minute and say, I can't take on this project, or I can't take on this right now in my life. Once this is stabilized, then I feel like I can put myself up.
It's an I'm not sure if you've ever read The Art of War, the Sun Tzu.
No.
You should, because it's like critical to advancement. But the Sun Tzu, it's all about war and how to wage wars and be successful in wars, essentially. But it's more recently, probably, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years now, that people started looking at it and saying, how does this apply to business and personal life? And I think at the get-go, people would say, oh, life and marriage isn't war. Raising children isn't war. But there's these concepts of, and I can't quite remember, but it's likely in there, but there's this concept where you would retreat back to a safe spot and then allows you to kind of
regroup.
Regroup. Because probably if I was looking at the Sun Tzu and someone said, well, what's the number one thing that you get out of the Art of War? I would say that it's probably the concept of logistics. And it's that everything in life is about logistics. Like the further you go away from your center or your core, which could be a metaphorical thing, a very existential sort of like, okay, well, I'm comfortable, in this mind process, or it could be physically going somewhere. And, there's comedians joke about, oh, well, I'm at home and that's where I keep all my stuff. But then if I go on a trip, then I pack up a smaller version of myself and move it over here. And then I take a side trip and that's yet a smaller version. But that's logistics, and you're kind of moving away logistically from it. And so you have to at some point be able to recenter and come back to a point where your logistical supply line is strong.
Right.
And that could be friends and, going to the gym and eating properly and just and having, mentors and coaches and stuff. And
for sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of broader concept too, kind of what we're going to cover anyways.
Yeah,
so,
awesome. Love it.
Yeah, that was my wild idea. But we were going to talk a little bit about, you gotten heavy into the coaching and experiencing coaching. And anyways, tell us a little bit about what you're doing. Otherwise, I'm going to talk the entire time.
Yeah, no problem. So I think there's so many good quotes that I picked up over the last, we're always learning and growing. But somebody mentions, they're like, I love reading a book, right? Because a book is like somebody's 20 years of experience all packaged up, and for $15 you can just hack this person's life, learn everything they have about this topic or this, and learn from that. And so I've always enjoyed learning and reading books, mostly self-improvement books, business books, finance books, running businesses, being a leader, those types of things. And
is it, just to interrupt, because I do it too, but is it because we're trying to find a hack? Like, is that why we're doing it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's our normal human thing. It's like, I just want to do, if someone could just give me that one thing, and if I could just do that, that would make life easier. Like, I think that's got to be part of why we read these books,
sure.
I think.
For sure. I think that, deep down we're all looking for an easier way to do something. And so, again, I think if you can take that person's 20 years of experience and learn from them and say, okay, well, I don't need to hit all the roadblocks, make all the mistakes that they made, skip over that and just learn the lesson, then ideally we can do some of that. So, and what's really fun is when you're learning and you find somebody's like, you need to do this, this, and this, and you're like, oh, that's actually really cool. I'm actually on step 2 or 3 already of this. I've kind of figured that out on my own. How great to have that confirmation from somebody that's, a financial mogul that's, says do this, this, and this, and you're already like, oh, perfect. I'm on my way there. On the other side, it's like you start learning, and it's like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And you're like, oh, snap, I've done all this.
I'm deep into that part.
Right.
Yeah. What's when you think of the books that you've read over the years, like, do any super stick out that are just like, if some kid shows up and is like, oh, great, Mr. Lore, what's give me your wisdom. What's those couple of books that I must read?
I think my mom introduced me to Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Oh, okay.
And I think that that's a great book for anybody kind of age 12 to 20. If they haven't read any financial books, it gives a really good, simple to understand education on the world of finance and investing, and a little bit of the out of the box thinking. So he's very much of, don't just go to school, get a job, work forever at a job you hate, and then hope to be able to, retire. He says, use these money, figure out what your assets truly are. So he talks about, assets and liabilities, how we treat them, how he treats them differently than anybody else in society. And then, gives advice on how to do that. And a lot of it's through, real estate investing and a few of those other things. So,
Any others?
That would be the first one that I would recommend. What's really interesting is that as you move through your journey of entrepreneurship or career or whatever that is, different things are going to apply much differently than they did. But I remember reading it probably in my early 20s when I was in school in university. And I remember reading it and going, oh, this is really smart. It talks about, business systems, financial systems, basically setting up franchises and like running a McDonald's, et cetera. But I didn't at the time.
Was that E-Myth?
Yes,
that was E-Myth.
E-Myth,
Yeah. Okay.
And but at the time, of course, I didn't have anything that I was doing to apply it to. Yeah. And so now reading it again, I'm like, I remember learning this stuff. I remember absorbing this, 20 years ago. And but I had nothing to apply it to. And so rereading the book now, it's like, okay, well, this makes sense. And I need to tweak this. And so
that's probably like if someone asked me, what's the number one book that you recommend to other people? That's probably the most frequently recommended book that I would recommend, just because you have so many people that are, entrepreneurs that are like desperately they're struggling with their business, Right. And I think the other thing that book really points at, which is, and in some ways it kind of leads into the whole coaching sort of thing, is that because that's a coach, like he's coaching you to do your business differently. But what it really brings up is that so many people, and we all know them,
and they decide one day it's like, oh, I'm going to start my own business. And so they go home and they start making beaded necklaces, or they're mowing yards and stuff. And they say,
oh, I'm a president of a company.
Right.
It's like, well, what's your company do? And it's like, well, it's not really the whole company, but it's just me and I mow grass. But in some ways the E-Myth would look at that and say, you just have a job, but you've also given yourself 4 other jobs to be the marketing and the financial part and
the worker. So, and it's, and then you're right. Cause if you didn't have something to
apply it to, you would think I'm an entrepreneur.
And so the next book that I've read recently is Dan Martell's book, Buy Back Your Time. Mm-hmm. And so further to that, he basically says, look, if you're, a solopreneur, you're this new person and you've got your business, you're making some money, whatever. The first thing you want to do is try to hire an administrative assistant. He says, because if you don't have one and you're doing all those small administrative tasks, you're basically a really high-paid administrative assistant, and you probably really suck at your job. Mm-hmm. And just recognizing that and having a bit of a mind shift there is super helpful. And I think that's a lot of what the coaches do, is because they have so much perspective, because they've got 20, 30 years, or they've been through the trenches so many times, they can look at your problem and see it as so small and so easy to solve with that perspective, and just help you shift your brain, because you're thinking focus on this. Yeah. And oftentimes it's like, no, you're way off base. You're like, your problem's actually this. Yeah. So I think that's where coaches and mentors really help out, is just giving that perspective.
I forget who it was. It could have been Blanchard or someone like that. They have that. You've probably seen it too, where it's like the 4 quadrants. I'm drawing on my page if you can't see this, but it's like, it's the 4 quadrants of life, where you have on the left axis, you have on fire and not on fire, and then you have important and not important.
Right.
And I forget who did it. I'm sure.
Yeah,
it could have been in the 7 Habits. It was it 7 Habits?
And Dan revisits that in his book as well. Yeah,
but it's because you kind of bring it up. It's like we get caught in that we're on fire, and it's not even important, but like it's going to take up our whole day.
We feel and that's something. It's really easy to get caught up in that. I know that often I feel really productive if I'm answering emails, but then I get to the end of the day and I'm like, wait a second, I don't think I actually did anything productive today other than put out some fires. And so I think it's really simple to get caught away in that feeling productive state, but then you can't. You're actually not producing any value to your company, to your customers.
Yeah, and there's a it's interesting, because this is you have to kind of look at this and squint a bit, but there's that book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, by Mark Manson. Mm-hmm. And what, a lot of people see that book and it's like, oh, it's the F word and I'm not going to read the book. But the whole book is really about getting out of that quadrant of life where everything's on fire. And if you're going to experience road rage, which he talks about in the book, is like, that's a complete waste of your time. Like, it means nothing. You won't even remember it in a few minutes. Like, focus on the stuff that actually makes a difference. And maybe that's what coaches help us do too, is they help us focus on the stuff that actually matters. Now, and like to lead into the coaching part, you're working with Dan Martell, and which is why you read the book probably.
Yeah.
But it's a good book for anyone to
Well,
read.
I saw him online actually being interviewed by another one of my mentors, a real estate mentor named Pace Morby. And just some of the things that Dan, they did about an hour-long podcast, and some of the things that Dan was sharing, I was like, wow, he's got some great advice and some great information. So I started absorbing his content, and then I read the book, and then I decided to join his mentor. Actually, I got about halfway through the book and then joined his mentoring program. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so, and like, I am a fan of coaching, but I don't actually today have a business coach, right? But like, what do you, if you summarize it, what are you getting out of it? What's the couple things that someone would say, oh, you're spending a lot of money, but so what are you getting out of it? What's the
great question.
upside?
Well, because I think that there's two sides to the coaching world, right? There's people that are doing a great job, that have really good information, really good content, great things to share, and real experience to divulge to the people. And then you've got a bunch of wannabes that are out there just trying to make a buck. Yeah. And so I think, first of all, filtering through those people and finding the right mentors is key. But for me, there's a number of things, and I think that coaching program is changing. We talked a little bit about it just before the show here, where a lot of the coaching or teaching was just one dude on a stage, the Zig Ziglar, whoever it was, just talking to 3,000 people. Yeah. Whereas now it's much more customized. So there's a coach for to learn how to windsurf. There's a coach to learn how to nutrition. There's a coach to teach you just to you had one for just posing, right, for bodybuilding. And so I think that's a different world that we live in now. That's a bit different than in the past. But for me, the thing that I get out of the coaching now is there's probably a few different things. One is the information, which is always great, right? You're taking their life information that they've gone through all these mistakes, and you get to hack through what they've gone through. Two, there's generally a community now associated with it, right? So there's more students. And for me, like, I'm on a call with Dan Martell, and he always does a question and answer period. And so these other business owners, entrepreneurs, people that are in the course, they basically come up with these questions, and a lot of them are like, oh, wow, you're one or two steps ahead of where I am. And so it gives me a little bit of an insight into what challenges are you running into that can help me today avoid those. Yeah. And so that's a huge benefit. Also, there's an opportunity to just reach out to those people in the community and say, hey, I see that you're a specialist in this, or I see that you're working on this. Can we collaborate? Can you teach me how to do this? And all, and then, there's so many skills to learn from coaches. So not only does Dan teach just general business mentoring and coaching, he also teaches how to sell. And so I'm not a very good salesman. I'm not very salesy. I get kind of cringy when I get a car salesman comes out and you're like, oh, and so, but learning how to just how to approach a sales call, how to do the social media stuff. Because social media is, 90% of all marketing now is, and so all of that is pretty new to me. And so one of the challenges that Dan gave to us is to get onto 2 podcasts a week. And so here I am reaching out to people like Craig and some other people to say, hey, I'd love to be on your show. Is there some way I can add some value to your listeners? And collaborating with people like that. So
I think there's 2 things that you bring to mind. Really, is that kind of that old school coaching environment, which like. There's been coaches, track and field coaches and swim coaches and like very athletic thinking coaches forever. There's even been, I guess we could extend and say there's been religious coaches insofar as your preacher, pastor, whatever it is, stands up in front of a crowd and does their thing. But I think a lot of and we talked about this earlier too, is a lot of coaching, like you said, was Zig Ziglar or, Blanchard or, Tony Robbins or, any of those people standing up. It was an evangelical experience, like and I think a lot of people went to it, not so much, like I think people took notes. And I've been to, Tony Robbins and others many times. And I think it's like a shot of endorphin, you know, it's
For
like,
sure.
this is awesome. And you come out of it and you're so fired up.
Right.
And I think that was a really big value and probably why a lot of people carry on with coaches. And yeah, and I think where it evolved, I don't know, maybe you saw this or not, but I think where it evolved was you had the Tony Robbins crowd, you know, which was the evangelical on stage coach. And then what it turned into was this group of people that wanted to coach, and they didn't really have much background or experience and stuff. So in order for them to be able to coach, they had to develop a program. And so I saw a lot of these programs back in kind of that 2000 to 2010 era where, you know, if I needed a coach, they would walk in with a binder and say, okay, we're going to go through A through Z, and your life is going to evolve based on this platform that we've created. It was an interesting environment. I think that still exists, but